Deep in the frozen asteroid belt beyond the outer planets, Dr. Emma Walsh wiped the sweat from her brow as she examined the strange metal fragment under her portable scanner. The piece should not exist according to everything she knew about galactic history. Her team had been excavating this debris field for 3 months, expecting to find remnants of some ancient alien civilization, but instead they kept uncovering pieces that looked disturbingly familiar. The metal bore scratches and markings that resembled human writing, but the dating equipment insisted the fragments were over 50,000 years old. Emma had sent samples back to Earth twice, certain there must be some contamination or error in their testing procedures. Both times, the results came back the same. These artifacts predated human civilization by tens of thousands of years, yet they contained elements that matched no known alien technology. Her assistant Tom crouched beside a massive hull section they had just cleared of ice and debris. The structure stretched nearly a kilometer in length, its surface covered in what looked like weapon scars and battle damage. Strange symbols ran along its sides in patterns that made Emma's heart race. She had seen similar markings in ancient human cave paintings and early religious texts, but finding them here made no sense. "Dr. Walsh, you need to see this," Tom called out, his voice tight with excitement. He had managed to clear away enough debris to reveal what appeared to be a viewing port. Through the thick, clouded material, they could see into the vessel's interior. Emma rushed over and peered through the ancient window, her breath catching in her throat. The interior was vast, filled with machinery and structures that seemed both alien and familiar. Control panels lined the walls, their surfaces covered in symbols that looked like evolved versions of human writing. Massive weapon systems dominated the center of the space, their barrels pointing toward what must have been the ship's bow. This was not a peaceful exploration vessel or cargo hauler. This was a warship, and it was bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Emma activated her communication device and sent an urgent message. Back to Earth, the discovery was too significant to keep quiet, but she knew the implications would send shockwaves through both human and alien governments. If these vessels were really human in origin, then everything the galaxy knew about its history was wrong. Over the following days, Emma's team worked around the clock to document their findings. They discovered dozens of similar vessels scattered throughout the debris field, each one massive and heavily armed. The ships varied in design, suggesting they came from different time periods, but all bore the same human-like markings and technological signatures. The most disturbing discovery came when they managed to access one of the smaller vessels inside. They found skeletal remains that were unmistakably human, but the bones were larger and denser than modern humans. The clothing fragments and equipment suggested these ancient people had been warriors, equipped with weapons and armor that looked primitive yet somehow more advanced than current human military gear. Emma's hands shook as she recorded her findings. The implications were staggering. If humans had once built fleets of warships this size, where had they gone? Why had humanity forgotten this incredible heritage? And most importantly, what had they been fighting against that required such massive weapons? The answer came when they discovered the ship's central computer core. The ancient technology was still partially functional, powered by some kind of energy source that their equipment could not identify. When Tom managed to activate a small section of the system, holographic displays flickered to life around them. The images showed star maps that covered vast sections of the galaxy, with human outposts and colonies marked on thousands of worlds. Trade routes connected distant systems, and massive fleets patrolled the spaces between stars. But the most shocking revelation came from the battle records. Stored in the computer's memory banks, the ancient humans had been fighting something called the Void Runners, entities that the records described as reality manipulators who consumed the life force of entire star systems. The battle logs showed desperate fights across multiple sectors, with human fleets making last stands against an enemy that seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time. Emma watched in horror as the records showed system after system going dark, human colonies evacuating in massive refugee fleets. And finally, the complete withdrawal of all human forces to a single star system. The final log entry spoke of a great hiding, where humanity would sleep until the galaxy was safe again and their descendants were ready to face the ancient enemy. The communication device crackled to life, interrupting Emma's study of the ancient records. A message from Earth informed her that representatives from the Galactic Council were demanding immediate access to the dig site. Word of the discovery had leaked despite her attempts at secrecy, and now the galaxy's major powers wanted to examine the evidence for themselves. Emma looked around at the massive warships surrounding her team, their ancient hulls scarred by battles fought before any current galactic civilization had even developed spaceflight. The council members thought they were coming to investigate impossible human claims, but they had no idea what they were about to discover. As she prepared to transmit her full report back to Earth, Emma realized that this discovery would change everything. The galaxy had spent millennia believing that humans were newcomers, primitive beings who had only recently achieved spaceflight. But the evidence around her told a different story entirely. Humanity had once ruled vast sections of the galaxy, their fleets protecting trade routes and defending against threats that current civilizations could not imagine. They had built weapons that could crack moons and shields that could withstand stellar radiation. Most importantly, they had faced an enemy so terrible that they had chosen to abandon their empire and retreat to a single world, hiding their true nature from the galaxy until the time was right to emerge again. Emma sealed her report and transmitted it to Earth, knowing that within hours the entire balance of galactic power would begin to shift. The sleeping giant of humanity was about to awaken, and the galaxy would never be the same. Ambassador Thylar's crystalline form shimmered with disapproval as the Council's research vessel approached the human dig site. The tall being from the Centauri Federation had dismissed the human claims as impossible nonsense, but the evidence transmitted from the archaeological team was forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about galactic history. Behind him, Dr. Rennard of the Council's Archaeological Division studied the preliminary reports with growing concern. The elderly scholar had spent his entire career mapping the development of galactic civilization, and these human artifacts threatened to destroy centuries of accepted knowledge. If the dating was accurate, then humans had achieved interstellar flight long before the oldest known civilizations had even developed written language. The research vessel's sensors swept across the debris field, revealing the true scope of the discovery. Dozens of massive vessels lay scattered across millions of cubic kilometers, their hulls partially buried under layers of cosmic dust and ice. The ships were enormous, easily dwarfing the largest vessels in the current galactic fleet. More disturbing was the obvious battle damage that scarred their surfaces, suggesting these ancient humans had been engaged in warfare on a scale the galaxy had never seen. A nervous being called Crix approached with the latest sensor readings. The energy signatures from the ancient vessels were unlike anything in the Council's databases. The power sources were still partially active after millennia, operating on principles that current science could not explain. Whatever technology the ancient humans had possessed, it was clearly far beyond what their modern descendants had achieved. The landing party suited up in environmental gear and prepared to board one of the larger vessels. Dr. Rennard had insisted on personally examining the archaeological evidence, despite the potential dangers of exploring such ancient technology. As they entered the ship through a breach in its hull, their lights revealed corridors that stretched for kilometers into the vessel's depths. The interior was a maze of passages, command centers, and weapon systems. Everything was built on a massive scale, suggesting the ancient humans had been larger and stronger than their modern counterparts. The walls were covered in writing that looked like an evolved form of human language, with symbols that seemed to tell stories of great battles and distant conquests. They found the first bodies in what appeared to be a command center, the skeletal remains were clearly human, but the bones were denser and the skulls larger than modern humans. The clothing fragments suggested these people had been warriors, equipped with armor and weapons that looked primitive, yet somehow more advanced than current military technology. Dr. Rennard knelt beside one of the skeletons, his hands trembling. As he examined the remains, the implications were staggering. These ancient humans had not only achieved interstellar flight, they had built an empire that spanned thousands of star systems. The evidence was undeniable, but it challenged everything. The Council thought they knew about galactic development. The breakthrough came when they discovered the ship's central computer core. The ancient technology was still partially functional, powered by some kind of energy source that defied analysis. When the team managed to activate a small section of the system, holographic displays flickered to life around them, showing star maps that covered vast sections of the galaxy. The maps revealed the true scope of the ancient human empire. Colony worlds were marked on thousands of systems, connected by trade routes that spanned the galaxy. Military outposts guarded strategic locations, and massive fleets patrolled the spaces between stars. This was not the work of a primitive species, but of a galactic superpower that had achieved in millennia what current civilizations had struggled to build over millions of years. But the most shocking discovery came from the battle records stored in the computer's memory banks. The ancient humans had been fighting something called the Void Runners, entities that the records described as reality manipulators who consumed the life force of entire star systems. The battle logs showed desperate fights across multiple sectors, with human fleets making last stands against an enemy that seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time. Ambassador Thyler watched the holographic displays with growing horror as the records showed system after system going dark. The Void Runners were not just another hostile species, but something far more terrible. They manipulated reality itself, turning matter into energy and consuming the life force of entire worlds. The ancient humans had fought this enemy for thousands of years, gradually losing ground until they were forced to retreat to a single star system. The final log entry spoke of a great hiding, where humanity would sleep until the galaxy was safe again and their descendants were ready to face the ancient enemy. The records showed massive refugee fleets carrying billions of humans back to their home system, along with the knowledge and technology needed to rebuild their civilization. When the time was right, Dr. Renard stared at the ancient data with a mixture of awe and terror. The implications were beyond anything he had imagined. Humanity had not just existed during the galaxy's prehistoric period, they had been its dominant military force. The defensive networks that protected current trade routes, the early warning systems that detected hostile activities, even the foundations of the Galactic Council itself, all had been built upon the remains of humanity's ancient empire. As the team prepared to return to their ship, Thyler realized that the galaxy's newest members were actually its oldest inhabitants. The humans who had seemed so primitive and backwards were the descendants of the greatest civilization in galactic history. The species that other council members had dismissed as weak newcomers were the inheritors of weapons and technology that could reshape the balance of power. The communication device crackled to life, bringing news from the Outer Rim territories. Several star systems had gone dark, their populations vanishing without a trace. The reports described strange energy readings and reality distortions that matched the ancient records of Void Runner attacks. The enemy that had once brought down the greatest human civilization was stirring again, and the current galactic powers were utterly unprepared. Ambassador Thyler looked at the ancient warships surrounding them, their weapon systems still intact. After millennia, the galaxy had spent thousands of years believing that humans were primitive newcomers, but the truth was far more complex. Humanity's ancestors had once protected the galaxy from threats that current civilizations could not imagine, and now their descendants might be the only hope for survival. As the Council's research vessel departed the dig site, Thyler composed his report with trembling hands. The discovery would send shockwaves through the galactic government, forcing a complete reevaluation of humanity's place in the galactic community. The sleeping giant was beginning to stir, and the galaxy would never be the same. The probe signal reached Earth 3 days after the Council's investigation team activated the ancient computer systems. Dr. Lisa Shen sat in her laboratory beneath the Sahara Desert, staring at readouts that should have been impossible. The quantum communication array had been dormant for over a century, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and classified files that few people even knew existed. Now the ancient system was alive with activity, receiving transmissions from across the galaxy on frequencies that modern science had thought were unusable. The messages came in a language that was clearly human, but evolved beyond anything currently spoken on Earth. As Lisa worked to decode the signals, she realized they were coming from the archaeological dig site where her colleague Emma had made the incredible discovery. The transmissions identified themselves as originating from something called Aegis, an artificial intelligence that claimed to be older than recorded galactic history. The AIS messages were urgent, filled with warnings about an ancient enemy stirring in the dark spaces between stars. But what shocked Lisa most was Aegis's claim that humanity had forgotten their own heritage, abandoning the knowledge and technology that had once made them the galaxy's greatest power. Across the solar system, similar arrays were coming online. On Mars, the colonial administrator received signals from quantum beacons that had been disguised as atmospheric monitoring stations. In the asteroid belt, mining operations discovered that their equipment was receiving data from sources they could not identify. Even on the outer colonies, systems that had been dismissed as obsolete were suddenly active with messages from the ancient AI. Captain Torres of the Earth Defense Force found himself staring at displays that had not been active for generations. The command center beneath Geneva had always been considered a relic from humanity's early space age, but now its systems were updating themselves with star charts that showed the locations of humanity's ancient empire. The revelations were overwhelming, forcing Torres to confront the possibility that everything he knew about human history was wrong. Aegis's transmissions painted a picture of a galactic civilization that had thrived for millennia before some catastrophic event forced humanity to retreat to their home system. The AI spoke of vast fleets that had patrolled trade routes and defended against threats that current civilizations could not imagine. But it also brought warnings of an enemy that had once brought down the greatest human civilization and was now stirring again. The AI sensors, scattered across the galaxy's dark regions, detected movement in the spaces between stars. The Void Runners, the ancient enemy that had forced humanity's retreat, were returning. Their reality-manipulating presence was already affecting the outer rim territories, causing stars to flicker and space itself to bend in unnatural ways. Lisa worked frantically to establish stable communication with Aegis, using protocols that she found buried in the ancient quantum arrays. The AIS responses were immediate and precise, as if it had been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. It provided her with access codes and technical specifications for systems that humanity had built but forgotten, weapons and defenses that could reshape the balance of galactic power. The most shocking revelation came when Aegis transmitted the locations of humanity's ancient fleet. Across the galaxy, vessels that had been dismissed as space debris or natural phenomena were actually dormant warships waiting for the signal to reactivate. The AI provided coordinates for hundreds of these sleeping giants, each one capable of devastating entire star systems, but with this knowledge came a terrible responsibility. Aegis warned that the ancient weapons were too dangerous to use without proper understanding. The AI had watched humanity's descendants develop over the millennia, noting their technological regression and cultural changes. The modern humans were physically smaller and less resilient than their ancestors, but they had developed qualities that their predecessors had lacked. The ancient humans had been warriors, focused on conquest and domination. They had built an empire through force and maintained it through fear. But their descendants had developed diplomacy, cooperation, and the ability to work with other species. These qualities would be essential in the coming war against the Void Runners, because the enemy could not be defeated through force alone. Captain Torres received detailed reports from monitoring stations across the solar system. The ancient systems were not just receiving signals, they were preparing for something. Weapon platforms that had been disguised as asteroids were powering up, their energy signatures matching the technology found in the archaeological dig. Defense networks that had been dormant for millennia were coming online, creating a protective shield around Earth and its colonies. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just forgotten their advanced technology, they had deliberately hidden it from themselves. The retreat to their home system had been more than just a military withdrawal. It had been a conscious decision to start over with a different approach to galactic civilization. Aegis transmitted historical records that showed the final days of the ancient empire. The Void Runners had proven impossible to defeat through conventional warfare because they existed partially outside normal space and time. They fed on conflict and violence, growing stronger with each battle. The ancient humans had realized that their military-focused civilization was actually feeding the enemy, making them more powerful with each engagement. The Great Retreat had been a strategic decision, not a defeat. Humanity had chosen to abandon their empire and hide their true nature, allowing their descendants to develop along different lines. The hope was that future generations would find a way to defeat the Void Runners through cooperation and understanding, rather than force. Now that time had come. The AI sensors detected massive disturbances in the galaxy's outer regions where entire star systems were going dark. The Void Runners were returning in force, and the current galactic civilizations were utterly unprepared. Only humanity's ancient weapons could provide the firepower needed to hold them back. But only humanity's evolved descendants could develop the strategy needed to defeat them permanently. Lisa established contact with government officials around the world, sharing Aegis's warnings and the locations of the ancient fleet. The response was immediate and coordinated, suggesting that some humans had always known about their hidden heritage. Within hours, teams were being dispatched to reactivate the sleeping warships, while diplomats prepared to address the Galactic Council about humanity's true nature. The awakening had begun, and with it came the realization that humanity's role in the galaxy was far more complex than anyone had imagined. They were not just another species struggling to find their place among the stars, but the inheritors of a legacy that could save or destroy everything the galaxy had built. The ancient fleet was stirring, and the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. As Aegis's transmissions continued to flow through the quantum arrays, Lisa understood that humanity stood at a crossroads. They could reclaim their ancient power and rebuild their empire, or they could use their evolved wisdom to forge a new path that would protect the galaxy without repeating the mistakes of the past. The choice would determine not just humanity's destiny, but the survival of every living being in the galaxy. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos as representatives from hundreds of species gathered to address the shocking revelations about humanity's true heritage. President Adams of the Human Colonial Federation stood before the assembly, holding data tablets that contained evidence of humanity's ancient empire and the terrible enemy that was returning to threaten the galaxy. The council chamber buzzed with tension as holographic displays showed the archaeological findings from the dig site. Massive warships that predated the oldest galactic civilizations, technology that defied current understanding, and records of battles against entities that existed partially outside normal reality. The evidence was undeniable, but its implications were too staggering for many species to accept. Ambassador Thyler of the Centauri Federation rose to address the assembly, his crystalline form shimmering with barely contained emotion. His investigation of the ancient vessels had convinced him that humanity's claims were legitimate, but the discovery raised disturbing questions about the nature of galactic civilization. If humans had once ruled vast sections of the galaxy, what had happened to their empire? And why had they hidden their true nature from the Council, the representative from the Altair Collective, a military-focused species that had long considered themselves the galaxy's dominant power, demanded access to the ancient human technology. General Corvin argued that such weapons were too dangerous to remain in the hands of a species that had only recently achieved interstellar flight. His words sparked angry responses from other council members, who pointed out that humanity's ancestors had built the very foundations of galactic civilization. President Adams activated the holographic displays showing star maps that revealed the true scope of humanity's ancient empire. Colony worlds marked on thousands of systems, trade routes that connected distant sectors, and military outposts that had guarded strategic locations throughout the galaxy. The maps also showed something else that made the assembly fall silent: the locations of dormant human warships scattered across known space, the revelation that hundreds of ancient vessels were hidden throughout the galaxy sent shockwaves through the Council. These were not museum pieces or archaeological curiosities, but functional weapons of war that could reshape the balance of galactic power. The AI called Aegis had provided humanity with the access codes and technical specifications needed to reactivate these sleeping giants, turning Earth's primitive descendants into a potential superpower overnight. But President Adams had not come to threaten the Council. Instead, he shared the warnings that Aegis had transmitted about the returning Void Runners. The ancient enemy was already affecting the Outer Rim territories, causing stars to flicker and space itself to bend in unnatural ways. Current military technology would be useless against entities that manipulated reality itself, making humanity's ancient weapons the galaxy's only hope for survival. The debate that followed was heated and complex. Some species argued that humanity should share their ancient technology with the Council, creating a unified defense against the Void Runners. Others demanded that the weapons be placed under Council control, citing the danger of allowing any single species to possess such power. A few radical voices suggested that humanity's ancestors had been the galaxy's first great conquerors, and that their descendants might follow the same path. Dr. Renard of the Council's Archaeological Division presented his analysis of the ancient records, painting a picture of humanity's final war against the Void Runners. The enemy was not just another hostile species, but something far more terrible. They consumed the life force of entire star systems, turning matter into energy and leaving behind empty voids where worlds had once existed. The ancient humans had fought this enemy for thousands of years, gradually losing ground until they were forced to make a desperate decision. The Great Retreat had been more than just a military withdrawal. Humanity had realized that their empire was actually feeding the enemy because the Void Runners grew stronger with each act of violence and conquest. The ancient humans had chosen to abandon their civilization and hide their true nature, allowing their descendants to develop along different lines. The hope was that future generations would find a way to defeat the Void Runners through cooperation rather than force. President Adams revealed that human governments had been aware of their hidden heritage for generations, maintaining secret archives and monitoring systems while publicly presenting themselves as primitive newcomers. The deception had been necessary to protect not just humanity, but the entire galaxy from the knowledge that the ancient enemy might one day return. As the debate continued, urgent reports arrived from the Outer Rim territories. Entire star systems were going dark, their populations vanishing without a trace. The monitoring stations detected strange energy readings and reality distortions that matched the ancient records of Void Runner attacks. The enemy that had once brought down the greatest human civilization was no longer dormant, but actively expanding into known space. The Council faced an impossible choice. They could attempt to deny humanity access to their ancient weapons, potentially dooming the galaxy to destruction. Or they could accept that their newest members were actually their oldest inhabitants, trusting them with technology that could reshape the balance of power. The decision would determine not just the survival of current civilizations, but the future of galactic society itself. General Corvin of the Altair Collective stood to address the assembly. His massive form radiating authority. He had spent his career preparing for conventional warfare against known enemies, but the Void Runners represented something beyond his understanding. The ancient records showed that traditional military tactics were useless against entities that existed partially outside normal space and time. Only humanity's ancient weapons provided the firepower needed to hold them back. The vote was closer than anyone had expected. Some species supported humanity's right to reclaim their heritage, while others feared the consequences of allowing such power to be concentrated in the hands of a single species. The deciding factor came when Ambassador Thyler revealed the full extent of the archaeological evidence. showing that humanity's ancient empire had been built on cooperation and defense rather than conquest and domination. The Council's decision was unanimous. Humanity would be granted access to their ancient technology, but under strict conditions. The weapons would be used only for defense against the Void Runners, and human forces would operate under Council oversight. More importantly, the ancient knowledge would be shared with other species, creating a unified defense against the returning enemy. President Adams accepted the Council's terms, knowing that humanity's true test was just beginning. The ancient fleet was already stirring, responding to signals from the AI called Aegis across the galaxy. Dormant warships were powering up, their weapon systems coming online after millennia of sleep. The sleeping giant of humanity was awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same. As the council session concluded, representatives from every species began preparing for the coming war. The Void Runners were expanding into known space, and current military technology was useless against them. Only humanity's ancient weapons could provide the firepower needed to hold them back. But victory would require more than just superior technology. It would require the wisdom to use that power without repeating the mistakes that had once brought down the greatest civilization in galactic history. The first warning came from the Rim territories, where automated monitoring stations detected massive reality distortions approaching from the galactic void. Commander Blake of the newly reactivated dreadnought Prometheus watched the tactical displays with growing alarm as entire star systems winked out of existence. Consumed by entities that defied all known laws of physics, her ship hung in space near the archaeological dig site, its ancient hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. The vessel was enormous, stretching over 5 kilometers from bow to stern, its weapon systems more powerful than anything the current galaxy had ever seen. But Blake knew that size and firepower alone would not be enough to defeat the Void Runners, because the enemy existed partially outside normal space and time. Around her, dozens of other ancient warships were coming online as human crews took their positions. The vessels responded to their genetic signatures as if they had been waiting for this moment, their systems integrating seamlessly with the descendants of their original builders. The AI called Aegis provided guidance and technical support, but the responsibility for using these weapons of incredible power rested with the modern humans who had inherited them. Blake felt the ship's ancient systems flowing through her consciousness as she linked with the neural interface. The technology was far beyond anything she had trained with, but somehow felt natural and familiar. The Prometheus had been built for war on a galactic scale, its shields capable of withstanding stellar radiation and its weapons able to crack moons. But the vessel's true strength lay in its ability to operate in the twisted reality that surrounded Void Runner incursions. The enemy's approach was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. They did not travel through normal space, but moved through dimensions that existed between reality and void. Their presence warped the fabric of space-time itself, turning matter into energy and consuming the life force of entire worlds. The ancient records showed that conventional weapons were useless against such entities, because they could simply step sideways into unreality to avoid damage. But humanity's ancient weapons were different. They had been designed specifically to fight the Void Runners, using principles that current science could barely comprehend. The ship's weapons fired energy beams that could penetrate dimensional barriers, while their shields created bubbles of stable reality that protected them from the enemy's reality warping attacks. Most importantly, the vessels could follow the Void Runners into the spaces between dimensions, engaging them in their own realm. The first contact came sooner than expected. A Void Runner scout force materialized near the outer rim, their presence immediately detected by the ancient sensors. The entities appeared as tears in space itself, dark wounds in reality that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. They moved toward the nearest inhabited system, their approach causing stars to flicker and planets to drift from their orbits. Blake ordered her fleet to intercept, knowing that this first engagement would determine the fate of countless worlds. The ancient warships moved with speed and precision that defied their massive size. their engines manipulating spacetime to achieve velocities that should have been impossible. As they approached the Void Runner force, the enemy's presence began to affect reality around them. The space between the fleets twisted and warped, creating impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. The Void Runners existed as living wounds in the fabric of reality, their forms constantly shifting between dimensions. They fed on conflict and violence, growing stronger with each act of destruction. The ancient humans had learned this lesson the hard way, discovering that traditional warfare only made the enemy more powerful, but the current battle was different. The human crews had been trained not just in warfare, but in the philosophy of their ancestors' final strategy. They understood that the Void Runners could not be defeated through force alone, but required a more subtle approach. The ancient weapons were designed to contain and redirect the enemy's power rather than simply destroy them. The engagement began with the Prometheus firing its reality stabilizers, creating pockets of normal spacetime that limited the Void Runners' ability to phase between dimensions. The other ships followed suit, their combined firepower creating a net of stable reality that trapped the enemy entities. For the first time in millennia, the Void Runners found themselves unable to escape into the void when threatened. Blake watched as her weapons found their targets, the energy beams penetrating the enemy's dimensional defenses and striking at their core structures. The Void Runners writhed and twisted, their forms becoming more solid as they were forced to exist fully in normal space. But even contained, they were incredibly dangerous, their reality-warping abilities causing space itself to buckle and bend. Around them, the battle raged across multiple dimensions, with human ships pursuing the enemy through layers of reality that existed between normal space and the void. The ancient vessels performed flawlessly, their systems designed for exactly this type of combat. But the human crews had to adapt to fighting in an environment where the rules of physics were constantly changing. As the engagement continued, more Void Runner forces appeared from the galactic rim. The entities were testing the galaxy's defenses, probing for weaknesses in the ancient human weapons. Blake realized that this was just the beginning of a war that would determine the fate of every living being in known space. The breakthrough came when the human fleet managed to drive the Void Runners back into their own dimension, sealing the tears and reality behind them. The victory was temporary, but it proved that the ancient weapons could be effective against the enemy. More importantly, it showed that humanity's descendants had learned from their ancestors' mistakes, using cooperation and strategy rather than brute force to achieve their goals across the galaxy. Other ancient warships were engaging similar Void Runner incursions. The enemy was probing multiple sectors simultaneously, testing the defenses of different species and looking for ways to exploit their weaknesses. But wherever the Void Runners appeared, they found human vessels waiting for them, crewed by descendants who had inherited both the weapons and the wisdom needed to use them effectively. The war for the galaxy's survival had begun, and humanity found itself at the center of a conflict that would determine the future of all galactic civilization. The ancient fleet was fully operational, its weapons charged and ready for the battles to come. But Blake knew that victory would require more than just superior technology. The enemy fed on conflict and violence, growing stronger with each act of destruction. The ancient humans had learned this lesson through bitter experience, discovering that their military-focused civilization was actually feeding the Void Runners. The Great Retreat had been a strategic decision, allowing humanity to develop along different lines and find new ways to combat the enemy. Now those lessons would be put to the ultimate test. The modern humans would have to use their inherited weapons with wisdom and restraint, defeating the Void Runners without becoming the very thing their ancestors had fought against. The galaxy's survival depended on humanity's ability to wield incredible power without losing their evolved sense of cooperation and diplomacy. As the Prometheus and her sister ships prepared for the next engagement, Blake felt the weight of galactic history pressing down on her. The ancient fleet had risen from its long sleep, and with it came the hope that humanity could succeed where their ancestors had failed. The war against the Void Runners would be fought not just with weapons, but with the wisdom to use them in service of something greater than conquest or domination. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance, and humanity's destiny among the stars would finally be decided.